Good evening and good morning, wherever you're located. Uh, my pleasure to be on this platform, and uh, I'm happy to be presenting uh, to all of you. So I'm calling it small forces. This presentation, and I'm going to work with three stories, three long extended stories on inhabitation in Mumbai to make my argument. I'm based in Mumbai currently in India, and the entire presentation is from Mumbai. So we are speaking from Mumbai. Okay? And these three stories are from my own practice, from my own kind of engagement with cities over the past 15-20 years. Uh, so just to give you a sense of Mumbai, Mumbai is on the western coast of India, and it's a city of now 12 million people. The metropolitan region is around 20 million people. Uh, the in the city, um, around 80% of the people live in households uh, with dwelling units which are of one room. So housing is really a critical issue, but it is also not a critical issue. I'll explain why is it so. All right. So that's a kind of a background one is talking about. Uh, you know. We have a large number of people living in something called slums. I do not like the name slum, but everybody understands the term slum, so we can keep using it. But then there are also houses which are very small, one room for 5-6 people, and around 70 to 80% people live in such houses with one room. All right. So 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 the first story is it's called "It's Madness Making the City." Uh, this is a man selling uh, these small LED lit uh, birds in one of the streets in Mumbai. Let me start with the first story. So here, this is the man. The story of this man, and I think there will be other people who will be adding to the story, will get added to the story as we proceed. Uh, this is in 2004 or 5. Uh, Basically, what happens is in Mumbai, uh, the real estate is a very very powerful and a big business, right? So and we were running at that moment a kind of a organization which used to help people to improve their housing condition. And this man was uh, you know was living in a building, again made up of one room houses. This was basically a house which was 3 meters by another 3.5 meters, 10 feet by 11 feet kind of a house. And this man lived with three sons, his wife and him. And uh, he used to work as a assembler, as a mechanic who would assemble velvet making machines. uh, and velvet making machines were kind of were used in the industries outside the city of Bombay. So he used to go outside to assemble these machines and come back. And by 2004 2005, I think the Chinese had kind of entered the market, and they were making the machines, right? And so he had lost most of his job, so he would be only called to repair older machines that he had built. Meanwhile, what happened was I came into his acquaintance because the building where he was living, that building was being threatened by another a developer, a politician developer, who was trying to kind of demolish this building and build a huge tower in its place and kind of give these people some money and throw them out, and they would be kind of living in some other place of similar or poorer condition. So this group of people from this building came to us to kind of asking us to help with the developer, and we were trying to file a court case to kind of help these guys to kind of maintain their premises. And in doing so, we met this guy, and I was kind of doing a survey of all the residents, and here I met this guy who had kind of who was threatened by international capital, who was also threatened by local capital. So he was a quintessential kind of a protagonist of this economy, which was kind of threatening the poor and the people with less resources. And then I started talking to him about his his work and his job and stuff like that. And then he was not interested in talking about his work or his job or his house being taken over by a developer or anything like that. He constantly told me stories about how he loved to find people who were lost in the city. And story after story was about how he found people who were lost in the city. And then I realized he was from a community, very orthodox community from the south of India, where people, young people would kind of, ideally kind of, prefer to kind of, leave their community and run into the city and kind of, get lost in the city and never look back to return to their community. So they would prefer to kind of, really get lost. And he had taken up his mission as searching and looking for these people. And then I looked around his house, and his house had strange things. His house had, very cheap magnifying glasses, and his house has, you know, uh, pens with invisible ink, and strange objects. And then I figured out he was basically looking at himself as a detective, as a spy. And that was interesting because my idea of this man was that of this laborer, who had lost everything, but he was himself looking at himself as this detective and a spy. And for him, he was literally living. His home was those journeys that he would take to kind of find people and navigate through the city through identifying various clues and kind of looking for them people and finding them and kind of meeting them and stuff like that. So it was kind of interesting to kind of meet a man like this. And I found that this was basically, he was living for being the spy or detective. He was kind of wanting to be a community spy and living his life like that. And then over the next few years, I met, during the course of my surveys and studies and fieldwork, kind of kept on meeting these strange and weird people who were kind of doing all kinds of strange things. Like, for example, this person, his ancestors migrated from Iran to India, and this man owns a shop. He's a small developer, but he owns a shop which his ancestors owned in Bombay, a sweet shop. But this shop opens only once in a year, during the Iranian New Year, Zoroastrian New Year, actually. So and he cooks for that day, and runs a shop for one day, and then shuts it, and then does his other work. So the shop remains shut for throughout the year, and this was one day when it opens and he sells his sweets, and then he goes back. You ask him why does he do this? He does it, you know, because for him it's pleasure and joy and fun to do it. This is another man, and you know, I've written about this. There are plenty of people now. I have a count of more than 100 people with these strange obsessions. This man used to repair electronic goods, you know, in the 80s, you know, the small TV sets and transistor radios and all of those things. And again, you know, the 90s brought in very sophisticated devices, and then he did not have much work to do, but then he had a premise. He had a shop in a very you know, rich area in the city. He divided the shop, gives away a part of his shop on rent, and then he likes to go back to his shop and work. And then he starts repairing everything that he gets, and he starts repairing his chair, kind of, you know, makes it very ergonomical. He starts changing the way his watch looks. He starts changing, making pens. He starts that energy that he has to repair, to open, and to kind of, you know, close things is something which gets used and produced in making of these very strange and absurd objects. And then when we spoke to him, he was repairing one old music system. And then I asked him, you know, have you repaired it? He said, no, there were 7 faults in this, and then I found 4 faults, and this is not going to work anymore because, you know, because I've not kind of, you know, corrected the whole thing. So the owner will come and take it away. I've spent 15 days identifying it. He's not going to pay me because it's not going to work. But I had fun opening it up and kind of, you know, dealing with it. Right now, the components are too small for him to handle. You know, they're just kind of, you know, very small for him to kind of repair. So he's able to manage some, and he's not able to manage. There are plenty of people, like, in the sense that I found a man who loves to make antenna, you know, those antenna which catch sound. So he catches sound. He kind of, you know, makes this strange antenna and wears his headphone, and the whole day he kind of, you know, catching sound from ambulances, from police vans. When I met him, he was catching sound between the private airplanes and the air traffic control tower, you know. So and then I asked him, why are you kind of, you know, getting those sounds? He said, you know, it's fun, but I also know which flight moves, you know, at what time. I said, what will you do with it? He said, it's kind of, you know, it's a kind of a keeping record of, you know, and the achievement that you kind of, you know, get to get sound as far as possible. There is no other joy but just to catch whispers and sounds which are far away, you know. And every time since then, we've met people with these strange obsessions. And now, wherever I go, I mean, I worked for 10 years with the government of the state, and even there I found these people with strange obsessions. You know, even very you know, clear planners obsessed with making a plan for the city, thinking that they'll make a good plan to save the city. But the plans have never made, at least in Bombay, the plans have never made the city better. They're upset. They believe that there would be a plan that they would make to make the city better. And everywhere you see this, you know, story after story of people with obsessions, and then you look at them, and then you figure out they're living their lives there. They're really living their lives there, and I have a hypothesis now that it is these energies of these human beings, these absurd, strange quests and trips and kicks, which basically lend their energy to the city. The city's energy is a accumulation of energies of all these people. The city runs because of these madness, really. The city runs really because of this strange energy. Otherwise, what is really running the city? It's not its infrastructure. It's not its. It is these desires. It is these strange aspirations. It is these strange obsessions which really run the city. I call them small forces. I call these energetic selves, the dimension of the self with which expresses itself in its energy and its desires. I call them small forces. Those small forces express themselves in multiple ways, as these obsessions, as compassions, as friendships, as many things. And I feel cities and societies are run by these small forces. That was the first story. My second story is called House is Not a Home. I'll slowly build up. This is a usual sight in the city of Mumbai in the month of May, June, July. And, and it's a very powerful sight, homeless people. It's a kind of a sight which hits you on your head. And people have two responses to this kind of sight. One is that, well, these are homeless, so they need to be provided houses, immediately. And the other response is kind of, just wipe them away, throw them, let them go wherever they want. They should not be on the street, which is supposed to be a public space, and which is supposed to be for cars and pedestrians and all of those things. Because they mess this, they have their dogs and they cook their food, and then they kind of have their shower and everything, and then they kind of live in the street, on the street. What I did was I once kind of 3, 4, 5 years ago worked out with my students to kind of follow these guys. Where do they go after those 3 months? Because they're there only for 3 months. And then they're basically tribals living in forests. So in certain seasons, they come to the city, they work there as construction labor, and then they go back to their homes. And what does their home look like? Their home looks like this. It's a tent. It's a small tent, a small mud or timber house with very fragile roof. Because the house is not this really. The house is the backyard, the front yard, the river behind, the mountain. All of that is the house. The entire landscape is the house, is a home actually. These are units where they keep some of their belongings which are not so precious, because they don't have anything like a precious belonging. The idea of property, the idea of permanence, and the idea of privacy, which dominate our thinking in terms of houses, is something which do not work here. Property, permanence, and privacy are something which are put in place by historically in the last 300 years, 200 years, and they are forms which come in as modernist ideas of what habitation should be. The idea of property, privacy, and permanence. These properties are shifting. They're not permanent, and the privacy is very, very different, because the idea of family is different. There's no idea of nuclear family, and therefore the house is different. The house is actually a landscape. This is not the home. This is just a small house where you keep your belonging, or you keep your but your home is really everything that goes around it, the entire landscape. This is a photograph from a butcher's colony, ex-butchers. They were shifted in the 70s and they were brought back. They were brought here. Now the butcher business stopped. They did something else. But then they had this strange relationship with animals. And their current houses also have animals in them. animals and plants of all kinds. They keep their goats, and this is in the center of the city of Bombay. You have people kind of rearing goats and chickens, and more than half of the house is these things, because house does not happen within, because home does not happen within those four walls, or those home happens on the street, on the outside, and on everywhere else. So the home happens much more. This is another example. It's an example of a very interesting housing type in Bombay. When I met them, this is around 7 years ago again. This man, was sleeping here, and was unwell, and he's been sleeping here for 3 years actually. That's his wife, and she's kind of, their house is a very small house. Basically, it's a house in the industrial parts of the city. Their houses are basically, one room. There is a corridor in the front, a corridor behind. There are doors on two sides. So this is the the courtyard in the center. The bridge, which kind of connects the two wings. Now, what is happening is the bridge is also an extension of the living room, by the way. So you enter through this corridor, you enter the house, and then you move into the rear of the house, and then you move into the behind corridor. And if you look at the plan again, it's kind of, it's the front corridor, back corridor, house, and the bridge. And if you look at the whole building, there are around 50 tenements, 50 households staying in the house, in this building, each one with one room. But the type and the form is such that the whole building becomes one large house, one large home actually. Because you can enter from here, you can exit from here, everybody kind of moves through the house, and then you realize that this is the architecture of care. And when you think about this, then that man who has been sleeping for 3 years, it makes sense, because he could sleep for 3 years, because every morning there is somebody who's coming and saying hi to him, having tea with him, speaking to him. He's not alone, but because his neighbors are holding him. And this form is able to handle it. It's the form of the house where, again, property, privacy, and permanence is kind of blurred. Bombay is full of strange occupancies. Now this is in one of those cooperative housings where there is a person who irons clothes, and he sleeps on this bed, which is also an ironing platform in the night, and during the day he works for ironing for people. And these kind of occupancies with public facilities, the extension of the mixing of privacy and public places, and that constitutes the blurring idea of home. The house form also doubles up as a workplace quite often, very often in the city of Bombay. Here the old couple who are making garlands is the inner city of Mumbai. This is inside a house. A family is making pots. And if you look at the house type, the house is basically a long house. There's a shop in the front, and then there are pots being made here, and the pots are kept here, and here is where the family resides. Behind it is a kiln where the pots are burnt, and this is how it looks. It looks very ragtag, but this housing is 200 years old. It's culturally developed. It's kind of it looks informal, but it is actually consolidated slowly over time. The house, which is also a place of work, and therefore extended idea of home. And there are plenty of houses across Bombay. More than 60% of the houses where this takes place, a work happens. Here this is animal fat being kind of processed for making soap. Uh, uh, People making broom. Here people making plaster of Paris casts, and then it goes on, and people making food and plastic recycling, and the tailors and the weavers and the people making printing and computer classes and all kinds of things. The house extends itself to the workplace. It also becomes much larger. This is another interesting you know thing about the city of Bombay. The inner city of Bombay has this trade of people who are kind of so basically who will carry baskets. This is a place where the cars cannot enter, but it's a large market. So you hire one of them, you keep buying stuff from there from the shop, loading them. They will carry the load with you, and then they will leave you wherever you want into your car or wherever your vehicle is. And they move around. Where do they live? They sleep in their basket, on their basket. They'll use public facilities. They have very basic kind of uh, requirements, and then they kind of their families are somewhere far away. They come here to work for a few days, go back, and then come back again. The city becomes the home. The house is not a home. The city becomes a home. The practice of life extends itself beyond the four walls of the house, and the city kind of becomes a home with multiple homes intersecting with each other. A group of friends who work in various houses. This is during Corona. I took it from my mobile phone. A group of friends, they meet. This is COVID times. This is like last week. I took this photograph. They meet during the mornings, have a cup of tea, meet together, and then they kind of go back. There is a solidarity being built, probably from the same village. And those solidarities get worked out as friendships. So when a new person comes into the city, the new person gets absorbed in the city through this collaborations, these friendships, these compassion touch. The classic case of the train of Bombay. 3 people reading one newspaper, like 3 strangers reading one newspaper in the. Now the way the density works is very interesting because the resources kind of gets used multiply. There are people who will spend 2 hours one way to go to work in these trains and 2 hours back. They come to their houses to sleep. They go back, and their homes happen in the train because in the train there are friends. They sing songs. They do all kinds of things. What is happening now is those life forms which are kind of extended and are getting shrunk, and it is called as informal, inhabitable, non-standard. And in the name of standard, you have these kind of very tall high-rise buildings emerging, which are unaffordable, and the private sector, which is on the top, and the government starts building these kind of houses to hold life within an apartment. It's impossible to hold that life because one, this is unaffordable. The top images are all private developers. Only 10% people live in those apartments, and the lower buildings are rehabilitation schemes by the government, which are inhabitable. That they're uninhabitable. You cannot live in because between 2 buildings, it's 3 meters distance, 10 feet between 2 buildings. There's no light, ventilation, nothing. But these are like blocks, which are put together. House is definitely not a home. My third story is is the whole idea about how do houses happen in the city? What are the productions? I call this story Wait and Watch. So again, some years ago, we were doing studies on how informal settlements get built in the city. How because there were lots of people from various universities from across Europe and America and from the eastern countries and all everybody coming to Bombay and India to kind of solve the housing problem and deal with the slum issue. How is it going to be built? And then they kind of make these housing types. We did a study of how houses get built. This is the interior of the house, a small house. There's kind of very basic, you know, basic things. Then I met this woman, and this woman is super interesting because she kind of tells the story of how her house gets made, and that is kind of opens another dimension in the whole study of how slums and informal settlements kind of get made. She works as a maid somewhere, and she's kind of encroached, squatted on this house, but then she's been paying rent to somebody else who had actually kind of squatted earlier, but then that person died, and then this has become her house. And then slowly she kind of started getting some furniture. Some demolition happened somewhere, somebody's house got destroyed, some furniture kind of got thrown away. She pulled out those furniture, worked with a carpenter, built a house. She built a loft over there for her son, who generally sleeps through the day. He works in night shifts. This is his wife. This is the woman who explained that this house gets made slowly. Some second-hand tiles were going on. She found a door from somewhere which was thrown. Some TV set came from some friend's house. Some employer's house. This thing came up, and then slowly the house get built slowly. You cannot plan this house because here, the moment you build your first wall, between the first wall and building the second wall, there are lots of negotiations that happen. You need to negotiate with the neighbor, you need to negotiate with the government, you need to figure out whether you have the resources or no, and how much resources can you spend to build the next one, the technology, the plan. The whole thing depends on waiting and watching, really. You wait and watch. You take the first step and then you wait for some time till your negotiations settle, and then you build another layer. There are various kinds of agencies that happen over here. Small contractors, small plumbers, small carpenters. The whole. Yeah, this is our house, and then she also built another floor some years later where her mother lives, and on that floor there is another loft. So she's built this house, and then she's built another floor on top, and with the small ladder which goes to that house. And she has this two houses with two lofts, two rooms with two lofts. So, and then she's got some washing machine from somewhere which is used for I don't know what, and then there is something. So slowly the house gets assembled. This particular settee or a sofa or whatever, the bench is also kind of acquired from somewhere, repaired again, put together. These houses grow incrementally. They kind of get made slowly over time with a lot of agency. Impossible to plan this house because the resources are like that, the negotiations are like that. But then they have their own institutional networks. So this is the second-hand market, the largest one. There are plenty of them in the city, where all kinds of second-hand good used material, and the non-permanent material kind of gets sold in the city. It has its own ecology. It has its own institution. It does not come in the under the institution of the state. It does not. It is not generated by planners and architects and engineers. It is done by small contractors, and then their institutional networks are there. For example, this is really kind of very very vulnerable and very kind of you know, uh, unsettled kind of a place. But then in this particular place, we found this building. This is a very interesting building. This is a public toilet built by the state. And there is this guy who lives on top of the public toilet. He made his house on top of the public toilet. He's a caretaker of the house. This is this guy. And he has been slowly kind of, he embodies for me, the idea of incrementality. Slowly developing. He got some tiles from somewhere. He kind of, put together this mosaic. He also has a rabbit running around his house, and then he extends the parapet with this kind of a metal frame. And then this is interesting. He got a air curtain from some place, because it was very hot to live here. So he puts this over his bed to kind of and this air curtain kind of gives air, cool air, just a fast rotating fan. And the next time when we went there, the air curtains had two legs. So he slowly kind of upgraded. And then here you see the tiles. One tile over here, some bits of tiles here, some bits of tiles here, something else somewhere else. It kind of speaks about how incrementality work and what is its architecture here. Something which is unpredictable, something which does not depend on permanence. And then you move out onto the street, that architecture extends itself. It becomes a small box somewhere. And that small box becomes a small reading place, because people start keeping their used newspaper of the day, so somebody else can come and use it and read it. And then such boxes kind of start happening across the city. And then this is another box which is kind of which is locked. There's a box which is open. There is some god sitting inside it. During the evenings, this will open up to become a shop. This will probably get occupied as something else. Somebody's kind of got one old sofa, mounted on a series of stones and paver blocks, and made it into a living room, the sidewalk. The sidewalk becomes more complicated, because now you have to understand, these are houses which are very small. They live in houses which are very small. Here the street, the urban infrastructure, everything becomes the idea of the home. So you have friends who kind of meet along the highway, really, the service road. Friends who meet on a skywalk, and here I spent a lot of time just watching them, and then they kind of open their food, and then they start eating. It was almost like a picnic. This is infrastructure which was abundant by the state, and then now it's become a kind of a playground for people to kind of meet, and it's kind of extend itself. So basically, 3 points these are hypotheses I'm still working with, and kind of still kind of working and consolidating. That cities are made up of small forces. That's what gives them the energy. They are these energetic selves, trips, compassions, friendships. They are the ones, that energy makes a city. The idea of the home is more of a landscape, a community, a neighborhood, a network. It's beyond the idea of the house. And the idea of the house is what is driven by policy and market. But the idea of home is driven by small forces really, which kind of which helps you live. So making a case to rethink the idea of a home as a cultural entity put together through small forces. Thank you very much. We can close. The way I'm thinking is so if somebody comes to you and asks you to build 50 houses for 200 people, yeah, I mean that is a constraint that you will work with. But you are not building homes, you're building houses.
Yes, right.
You're building houses for them. You'll try to make them comfortable. You will be working within the dynamics of policy and market. But cities don't happen like that. Cities happen with a logic which require which get worked out through desires and friendships and compassion. So I would kind of think about not the units, but I would think about the neighborhood, which provides, which affords, which is able to hold that 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 complex of desires and friendships and compassions. I would think of it. I would think of it in terms of uh, logics which are not driven by standard occupation, in the sense that how much square meters does the family require? That is not my question.
But do architects have any instruments at all to make from house a home?
That's you need to define the way you define architects. Because I think if architects are primarily they are the way uh, uh, their role is to imagine and craft space, right? And if their role is to imagine and craft new space, then what is the idea of space? The idea of space can be one, for within a container, that there is something. But space also has many more dimensions, right? So space is also a social space. Space is also an environmental space, and when you start designing, you start, irrespective of whether you want or no, you start kind of shaping social hierarchies, shaping lives. So actually, architects need to recognize that they are not really only designing space or crafting and imagining space, but they are instrumental in shaping lives. And in the shaping of life, I think it's very important to then think about instruments which can help us shape lives. It's kind of because I feel if you look at the context of, and every context is different. Every context is different. So if you were to look at the context of thinking about what do you do with a informal settlement or a slum, what do you do? The typical market and policy argument has been to kind of remove them and give them standard livable commodity of a house and make them make them into one block. When you do that, you realize that you've disrupted all that exists in running the whole business of home. And this is something which we see everywhere, because the moment from an informal settlement, from a home which is extended into from the house to a street to everywhere else, when such a family moves to a apartment, many things happen. What is possible on a home which is where the street and somebody else's house is a part of your own house, those things aren't possible in the apartment where you have a confined. The simplest survey that we did was household violence increased. You know, the stress within the family gets resolved in an informal settlement. When there is a stress within the family, you go out on the street, you shout it out, and somebody else kind of comes, it resolves all of those things. It's very noisy, very awkward, but it gets resolved without violence. When it gets into the apartment, the family tries to resolve the stress within the house. The women get beaten up. What is happening over here? You've dignified in your own mind as an architect by giving comfort condition to a family, not realizing that you've kind of completely disrupted the whole ecology which that space configuration provided. So if you get housing to be made for 50 houses, then I would think of it in terms of restoring and preserving all of those relationships that are possible, that provided opportunities and less resources. But at the same time,
normally you
sorry?
don't know these 50 householders. Don't know nothing about that. That is just a number to make 50 flats. I think that is a problem.
There is a way in which things happen, like human beings settle. It's like first day of your university. You meet 50 people in your class, right? You meet 50 people in your class. You don't know anybody. You are kind of you are figuring out, and then you make friends with somebody. You kind of over the next week you realize that somebody talks a little bit more, somebody kind of gets angry a little bit more, and then slowly kind of figure out, and over a month you have kind of settled. When these 50 families come together, the same thing happens. They slowly settle. That's a different process. And then they will make their houses over time. They will make their houses over time. They will kind of make it. They will generate that complex. I was not talking of those when cities start from nowhere. I was talking of cities which are already there, societies which are there, which are kind of what does an architect do in societies which are already consolidated. And anyways, I would believe that if you were to build houses for people whom you don't know, then figure out a way to know them. One, if that is not possible at all, then figure out a way in which I think friendships and collaborations and can be built. You figure out ways in which resources can be shared and brought down. Figure out a form by which you don't isolate and clarify, but maintain autonomous condition, but figure out ways in which people are able to support and hold each other. And I think there are many advantages and particularly in this pandemic, particularly in this part of the world, we know that it is friendships and these collaborations which have held societies together, and not the state and not the standards and not the laws really. I was invited once to kind of, Delhi. In Delhi is another big city in India, so I was invited once to kind of, provide advice on how to deal with inner city areas. And inner city areas have this problem: very thin, narrow roads of 2 meters, 3 meters road, where you cannot take your fire trucks. Fire tenders cannot go through. So their plan was to widen this road for fire safety. And this widening of road meant that the whole thing kind of you destroy the entire thing, like you destroy half the houses or sometimes full houses. I quietly asked them, the problem is not with the fabric of the inner city. The problem is with the fire tender. You can figure out a way of dealing with fire differently. What happens is modernist ideas of dealing with fire is one, but there can be plenty of other ways to deal with fire, which we need to explore. And I think we have not been putting our minds together to deal with fire more, more uh, intelligently or more. And then we try to kind of use the fire regulation which are used for standard buildings into all buildings. And I think those engineering and planning leaps we need to make if we need to kind of think about societies and cities differently.
Hello, Professor Prasad. I'm
Yes.
Ruhul from Indonesia, and
Yes.
I would ask some question. Yes, that's very interesting about the new idea, new perspective about settlement in India, and I got two questions about this. First, people from your story, I got that people feel comfort with that condition. The incrementally the home, like people put some material and build incrementally and so on. But we know we have the standard that there's a standard for better living, the better living, so as healthy condition, and then the security, and then so many more. But uh, how about this concern, this healthy aspect? Maybe in this pandemic, I just read some paper that in the informal settlement, they got a lot of case of this pandemic because of the informality, and they need to care well, and need to be solve the problem, like those informality. How what do you think about that? And the second is, then what is the role of urban design? That we know that urban design is there for make the better living, make the better living. I assume that those people can live more better in those conditions, but I don't know how the best way for them. I think what do you think about it?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. I have to kind of I have to kind of there are three responses to this question actually. Uh, One is the idea of uh, good living, better living. Uh, you know, uh, what is the ideal living condition, uh, and how did we get it? How did we kind of formulate it for ourselves? Why is it that we need to sleep for 8 hours a day? Imagine a prehistoric person, cannot afford to sleep for 8 hours. It's kind of sleeping in the night is impossible for a prehistoric person because the prehistoric person will be killed. Like a. So we have come to this idea of comfort, this better living, good living from somewhere. There is some history to from where we have come to it, right? We have come to it from some historical, jump. These ideas have come in front of us. It's kind of the idea of cleanliness, the idea of hygiene, the idea of health, the idea of pollution. All of those things are historically constructed, and it is constructed through the idea of class and caste in India and all those things. That is one thing that I would really interrogate, and I would ask questions about where did my idea of good living come from? Not what is the idea of good living. Where did the idea of good living come from? Is it really good living? Number one. Number two, I personally have no problem if everybody gets very good living conditions. In fact, I believe that everybody should get good living conditions. The problem is that cities are unable to afford those good living conditions, and the moment they make something, they make the conditions worse. They kind of they work out a condition which makes it really worse. They shift people from an informal settlement to another. They give them the toilets inside the house. They give them clear property. What they're giving is clear property. They when a slum gets erased and then they are put into a proper house, that house is actually a clear property which is given, and that property can be sold easily and transacted. The people who are making profit from it are only financial institutions and banks. So I would kind of really say that the problem is not really in everybody getting good living condition. Everybody should get a good living condition, but what is replacing is not good living condition. What is happening is, like, we are like last 50 years India has been struggling to provide good living condition, but they're not able to do it. What they're doing is becoming worse and worse, actually. And that's the real problem. How should we kind of go about thinking about it? There are plenty of possibilities. My own school is trying to work with repair and retrofit of informal settlements. The living condition is poor. Figure out ways to improve living conditions in those settlements. And then that is possible with very little resources. With very little kind of don't erase it and build new towers. You kind of you figure out a way in which you can upgrade, improve, repair, retrofit, all kinds of things. So I would not challenge your idea of good living condition, but say that in the absence of providing for good living conditions, at least don't disrupt what is good in these settlements. Okay, so that's my response. What should an urban designer do or an architect do? My direct answer is to look at ways in which you can increase the transactional capacity of urban form. Let me demonstrate it. What does it really mean? Like the whole idea is that what you design as a building or as a urban installation, as an urban design experiment, what you do is you design something. If you build a wall between two properties, it just separates. But if you plant a row of trees, then there is a possibility that people might cut across. Right? What you have done is you've increased the transactional capacity of that edge. Right? So you increase the transaction, you figure out a way in which you increase the transactional capacity of form. Figure out ways in which the form can allow people to do many more things. Figure out ways in which the form itself can bring about safety and security for people. Figure out ways in which the form itself can provide an architecture of care. You know, that building that I showed about the man sleeping for 3 years. It is the form of the building which provided that care, right? It is so figure out a way in which the form can provide justice, the form can provide care, the form can provide economic opportunities, and I think that can be done in terms of increasing the transactional capacity of the building. So to answer your direct question directly, what does an urbanist or a urban designer or a architect do? Figure out ways in which you increase the transactional capacity of a built form, of an urban form.
Thank you so much. Very interesting.